Nobody ever tells you this part, but most water changes aren't maintenance. They're damage control. They're something people do because their tank is fighting itself. And if that statement makes you uncomfortable, good, because it means you were taught the shortcut instead of the system. From the moment someone buys their first aquarium, they're handed the same rule like it's law. Change the water every week. 20%, 30%, sometimes more. No explanation beyond, that's what you do. And nobody stops to ask the obvious question. Why does this glass box need constant intervention to survive? Why does it collapse so quickly without human interference? In nature, fish don't get weekly resets. Rivers don't get drained and refilled on a schedule. Lakes don't get buckets dumped out and replaced with fresh water from a tap. What they get is stability, volume, biology, time. And that's the part that gets skipped in most home aquariums. Water changes became popular because they work, temporarily. They remove waste, dilute mistakes, and hide bad design. Overstock the tank? Change water. Underfilter it? Change water. Overfeed? Change water. Skip biological capacity entirely. Just change more water. It's not fixing the problem. It's erasing the symptoms before they stack up enough to crash the system. The uncomfortable truth is this. If your tank requires constant water changes to stay alive, then the tank is incomplete. Something fundamental is missing. Most aquariums are built around mechanical filtration, sponges, floss, pads, things that trap debris so it looks clean. But cleanliness isn't health. The real work happens invisibly through biology. Bacteria converting toxic waste into less harmful compounds. Biofilm coating surfaces. Microorganisms processing what fish produce every second they're alive. Without that biological depth, waste doesn't disappear. It accumulates. And when it accumulates faster than the system can process it, the only option left is dilution. That's where water changes come in. But dilution isn't balance. A properly built aquarium doesn't rely on dilution. It relies on capacity. It has enough biological surface area to handle waste as it's produced, not days later. It has enough volume to absorb fluctuations without swinging parameters every time something changes. It has enough stability that nothing dramatic happens when you skip a week, or a month, or even longer. This is where people usually push back and say, but nitrates. And that word gets treated like a death sentence, as if the moment nitrates appear, the tank is failing. But nitrates aren't the enemy. Uncontrolled nitrates are. Rising nitrates are a signal, not a poison. In balanced systems, nitrates don't climb endlessly. They plateau. Plants consume them. Bacteria reduce them. Volume buffers them. And when all of that is in place, water chemistry stops swinging wildly. pH stabilizes. Fish stop showing stress behaviors. Disease becomes rare instead of routine. What most people don't realize is how stressful constant water changes actually are for fish. Every change alters temperature, mineral content, dissolved gases, and chemistry, even when you're careful. Fish adapt to stable conditions far better than they adapt to repeated resets. A tank that's constantly being fixed is never allowed to mature, and maturity matters more than people think. A young aquarium is fragile. It has no history, no biological depth, no resilience. Every input matters. Every mistake shows up immediately. That's why beginners are told to change water constantly, because their tanks haven't earned stability yet. But mature systems behave differently. They don't spike. They don't crash easily. They absorb stress instead of amplifying it. And once a tank reaches that point, the idea of weekly water changes starts to feel unnecessary, sometimes even counterproductive. This doesn't mean neglect. It doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. It means shifting focus from intervention to design, from reaction to prevention, from chasing numbers to building capacity. Because here's the reality nobody puts on the box. Water changes don't create healthy aquariums. They keep unhealthy ones alive. And once you understand that, the entire approach to fish keeping changes, from how you filter, to how you stock, to how you feed, to how you think about time itself inside a tank. That's where most people get stuck. They never move past the emergency phase. They never build past survival mode. And as long as the system depends on constant human correction, it will never truly stabilize. And that's the point where the question shifts. Not how often should you change water, but why does your tank need it at all? At some point, every tank tells you what it really is. Not with numbers on a test kit, but with behavior. With how quickly it recovers. With how little it reacts when something goes wrong. That's when you find out whether you built an aquarium or just a container you've been propping up. When people try to stop water changes and fail, it's almost never because the idea is wrong. It's because they skipped steps they didn't even know existed. They removed the water changes first, instead of removing the reason the water changes were needed in the first place. The foundation is filtration, but not in the way most people think. Flow and polish don't matter nearly as much as biological surface area. A filter that looks powerful on paper can still be biologically weak. Ratings are marketing. Capacity is physics. If the system doesn't have enough surface for bacteria to live on, waste will outpace processing no matter how clear the water looks. That's why oversized filtration isn't optional in low-maintenance tanks. It's mandatory, not for movement, but for biology. Media volume matters more than turnover. Porous materials, slow flow through biochambers, and time are what turn waste into something manageable. A tank that's barely filtered enough to survive will never stabilize. It will always depend on resets. Plants are the next layer people underestimate. They're not decoration. They're nutrient sinks. Fast growers, floaters, root feeders. They all pull from different parts of the water column. They convert excess nutrients into growth instead of letting them stack invisibly. In tanks without plants, the system has one less exit ramp for waste. That doesn't make them impossible. It just raises the bar everywhere else. Stocking is where most systems break. Not because fish are bad, but because volume lies. Just because fish physically fit doesn't mean the system can support them long term. Every fish is a waste engine. Every feeding adds load. The closer you push the limits, the more the tank needs intervention. Stable systems aren't pushed to the edge. They're built with margin. Feeding is the silent killer of balance. Overfeeding doesn't just raise nitrates. It overwhelms biology before it has time to respond. Excess food rots faster than bacteria can adapt. People blame water quality, but it's usually timing. Mature tanks forgive mistakes. Young or overloaded ones punish them immediately. And then there's time, the one variable nobody wants to wait for. Biological systems don't rush. They layer. They thicken. They become resilient slowly. You can't shortcut that with products or schedules. A tank that's been stable for a year behaves differently than one that's been stable for a month, even if the numbers look the same. History matters inside glass. This is why no water change tanks aren't beginner tanks. Not because they're complicated, but because they require restraint. You have to let the system settle. You have to resist the urge to constantly intervene. Every time you reset the environment, you delay maturity. Every time you chase perfection, you prevent stability. That doesn't mean water changes disappear forever. They become situational instead of routine. You use them when something breaks, not because the calendar says so. You correct, then step back. You respond, then allow the system to rebalance itself. There are moments when water changes are absolutely the right move. After medication, after a death that went unnoticed, after a clear mistake. But those are events, not habits. The difference matters. What surprises most people is how tanks behave once they're allowed to settle. Parameters stop drifting. Fish stop flashing and hiding. Algae becomes predictable instead of explosive. The system develops inertia. It takes effort to knock it off balance, which is exactly what you want. The irony is that the more stable a tank becomes, the less dramatic it looks. No constant adjustments. No emergency fixes, no weekly rituals, just consistency. And that consistency is what fish evolved to live in. The industry doesn't talk about this much because stability doesn't sell products. Consumables do. Weekly routines do. Dependency does. But biology doesn't care about business models. It only responds to conditions. If your tank collapses without water changes, it isn't because water changes are sacred. It's because the system hasn't been allowed to finish building yet. And once it does, the role of the aquarist changes, from caretaker to observer. That's the real shift. Not abandoning responsibility, but trusting the environment you created to do what it was designed to do. Because when the system is right, maintenance becomes minimal, and the fish finally stop living inside a constantly interrupted world. And that's when you realize the goal was never fewer water changes. The goal was a tank that didn't need saving in the first place.